years of real, solid, and substantial. 3 days of sanctification. Okay, so we're crossing over into the giving of the Torah, that 50th day. Now this is when God came down. On to Exodus 19, still in Exodus 19 actually, down to verse 16. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunderings and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people that was in the camp trembled. It came to pass, there was a day. All that journey equaled up to, there was a day. Okay, verse 20. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai, on the top of the mount. What a sight to see. What a sight to see. So we have 3 days of sanctification, and God, with supernatural manifestation, comes down, not us to him, but he to us, with visible and audible manifestations, and reveals his presence to us, and tangibly, solid, real, substantially, gave them the law of the covenant, written by his finger on solid, tangible tablets of stone. He gave them to the book of the covenant. That was the civil laws, how they were supposed to conduct themselves with each other, ceremonial laws. There's 3 things he gave them. This is the book that was sprinkled with blood and kept in the ark of the covenant. And then he gave them literal measurement and specifications for the tabernacle system and all that entails, of how that is how you approach God. So we have the book of the covenant, how we're supposed to live as a community. Then we have the tabernacle system, how we're supposed to approach God. And then we have the law of the covenant, all given in tangible, physically, things you can touch, solid, real manifestations. Okay, now, from here, I don't think there's any question, there's no doubt in my mind that it was God's will that they come out of Egypt. God meets them at Mount Sinai, and they are ready, they are prepared, and their training is complete once they get there. And that it is his perfect will to bring them immediately into the promised land. That was his perfect will. To go from Mount Sinai, cross the Jordan, and start conquering territory in the promised land. Now, what is the promised land? Territory that is currently inhabited or possessed by the enemies of God. That's what the promised land is. It's also a land that doesn't sound very promising. But when you get down to it, people talk about it flowing with milk and honey, and indeed it is. But it's what the promised land is strongholds held by the enemy, territory held by the enemy. You have territory and strongholds held by the enemy. That's the promised land. Okay. But it is also flowing with milk and honey. Okay, so they could have gone straight from there into the promised land. Of course, we know that didn't work out. That's entirely another topic. But that was his perfect will. That was his perfect will. So that brings us to completion. That's 7 weeks. Those 7 steps that the children of Israel went through. That is that 7 weeks element of Shavuot. What is the definition? What happened there? It was a time of training and personal growth as they strove toward God's promises. One word summary, preparation. Because God's perfect will was to get them prepared, get Egypt out of them, and get them out of Egypt, consecrate them unto himself, and take them directly into the promised land. That was his perfect will. So this 7 weeks time is an unparalleled time of training and preparation that does not happen any other time. It is a unique and special season of training and preparation. All right. So the 7 weeks of Shavuot was not about what God did for them. Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, death, burial, and resurrection. That was what God did for them. Now, Pentecost, Shavuot, is what God is doing in you. This 7 weeks journey of training and personal growth is not His work for you, it's His work in you, which brings to completion on a day. There is a day of completion where the training is complete and you are free to go to the promised land. But that didn't happen in this particular situation. Only one step, if you notice, was an assault from the outside. God knew they were not ready for warfare yet, because that's what the promised land was. It's a territory held by the enemy. So all of the rest was inner testings. Virtually all of these steps was getting Egypt out of them, teaching them and how to follow His leading. His sheep hear His voice. So He was preparing them for battle. That's what those 7 weeks were. He was preparing them for battles that they would face on Jordan, because they wouldn't have been able to handle Jericho after the Red Sea, but they were able to handle it after Jordan. All right. So, big key here. Preparation is, in fact, part of a promise coming to pass. It is not separate. The same way you cannot separate Shavuot 7 weeks from the day. It is all one interrelated unit, that color wheel thing going on. Don't grumble, so to speak, when the Lord's training you. That is part of the promise coming to pass. He's getting you prepared and ready to handle His promise. Okay, now this brings us to the New Testament. That was the Old Testament. That was the original. Now the New Testament. What happened to the New Testament during that time? That was the Lord's resurrection through the ascension to the upper room. Right? So, these things parallel each other. We should, in principle, at the very least, see in the post-resurrection ministry of the Messiah this 7-step journey in the 50-day numerology. We should see both of those, because it's a type and a shadow of what's coming. Okay, we should see this 50-day numerology, and we should see the 7-step journey. Okay, so the first thing was the bitter waters turning sweet. They were thirsty. Let's go to John 21, 4 through, John 21, 1. I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. Eager to get there. The bitter waters were turned sweet. People were thirsty. Okay. Now, Moses was accomplishing what the Lord told him to do. He was leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. The bitterness here can be a physical, remember we're going from the temporal into the spiritual, can be physically and spiritual bitterness. Now, Peter here, let's read verse 1. Verse 3, actually, I'm sorry, I'll get it right. Simon Peter saith unto them, I go a-fishing. I go a-fishing. They say unto him, we also go with thee. So he's decided what he's going to do. This is after the Lord has come back and already appeared to him twice. I go a-fishing. Says nothing about what the Lord told him to. I go a-fishing. And they say unto him, we also go with thee. So he's taking the people with him. People are following him. We also go with thee. They went forth and entered into the ship immediately. And that night they caught nothing. Okay. It's a dry, bitter place when the workers of the Lord are not accomplishing the will of the Father. 3 days from crossing the Red Sea, from that resurrection they came to a bitter place. They needed sustenance. The sheep needed sustenance. And this was, as we see in verse 14 here, this was the third time that Jesus showed himself to them after his resurrection. So, it took Moses, their leader, crying out to God to show him a way to get sweet waters to the people. Now, Peter, he's a leader. The others are following him here. He's out fishing for himself. There's nothing wrong with fishing, but you have to do it with the Lord's purpose involved. And that's what this is. There's nothing, he's not saying that you can't go fishing. You need to do all that you do with all your heart as unto the Lord. Okay, so being a leader, others follow him. So can you imagine Moses 3 days out? Well, this is bye. No, that wouldn't have worked. That wouldn't have worked. It took Moses getting down on his knees and crying out to God for them to be shown the way. Now, there is a spiritual bitterness here. The sheep are not being fed or watered. Peter, just a few verses later, Jesus is telling him, get back to what I want you to do. Feed my sheep. Go back to what you're supposed to be doing. And this may not be bad, but this is not what I wanted you to do. Feed my sheep. Okay. The sheep were not being fed, and Jesus told him, go feed the sheep. Okay, so the sheep were being left with bitter waters until Peter came. And God got him back on track. Peter was indeed supposed to be a fisher. Just as God used the staff in Moses' hands, God used Peter's skills and abilities and found his own purposes through them. So, and it was also through Peter, the vision came, and the Gentiles were brought in. Peter listened to the Lord. He fed the sheep. All right. Number 2, the manna and the quails. And the same story here. Found this when Jesus met them while they were fishing. Jesus had his intervention there. Okay, there are many, many lessons to this particular passage of Scripture. This is not the only thing to learn from this Scripture, from these Scriptures here, from this passage. But this is the one that applies to this lesson. Okay, so John 21, let's go on to verse 4. But when the morning was now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. Okay, they didn't recognize him. Then Jesus saith unto them, Children, have ye any meat? They answered him, No. And he said unto them, Cast the net on the right side of the ship, and ye shall find. As if that would make any logical or rational difference, but obedience is better than sacrifice. They cast therefore, and now they were not able to draw it in for the multitude of fishes. Therefore, that disciple whom Jesus loved, John, said unto Peter, It's the Lord. Okay, therefore, he said, It's the Lord. It doesn't ever say that John recognized him by sight as a person. What he recognized was the Lord's working. He recognized the Lord's work.
Hallelujah.
He recognized the Lord's work. It wasn't sight. They still didn't recognize him with the sight. And they walked with the man. But they recognized his works. Down to verse 9. And as soon as they were come to land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid thereon, and bread. Okay, when I was reading through that, okay, fish and bread already prepared before they got there. It was already there. Where did Jesus get the fish and bread? Same place he got the bread and the manna, and then the quails, rather. You know, he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. The earth is his in all its fullness. Okay, it's already prepared. He's providing their immediate needs right there. Verse 10, Jesus saith unto them, bring of the fish which ye have now caught. Now the Lord's being really polite there because it was actually his doing anyway that caused them to even catch what they thought they caught themselves. He is the source of all of our sustenance, even what we think we do ourselves. It's his enabling, it's his leading and direction that ultimately brings all of our provision. In him we live and move and have our being. Okay, but the Lord's being polite there. Okay, what you call it. Okay, verse 11. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to lay full of great fishes, 153, and for all there were so many, yet was the net not broken. Okay, verse 12. Jesus said unto them, come and dine. And none of the disciples durst ask him, who art thou? Knowing that it was the Lord. Okay, they still didn't recognize him by sight. They still didn't recognize him by sight. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been any question to say, and they dared not ask him who he was because they knew. If they recognized him by their sight, there wouldn't have been any reason to even thinking about asking him who he was. Amen. They did not recognize him by sight, none of them, but they all recognized him by his works. Okay. So the point for us is not just that he's our provider, even though he is, and he provides in every way possible. He is our provider. Even what we do for ourselves, he is the source of. The key element here, related back to the children of Israel, is that we have to know the time of our visitation. When the children of Israel walked outside their tent, and the Lord even told them exactly what he was doing, they walked out and went, manna, which means, what is it? The disciples, the same way, when they saw the Lord's provision, they didn't understand with their mind still. They were still saying manna with their mind, but in their spirit, they knew who it was. They knew it was the Lord. So we don't want to walk outside our tent, our proverbial tent, and when the Lord provides or whatever, we don't want to be saying, manna, Lord, is that you? We need to be able to know the time of our visitation and learn to recognize him. Because where he is, that's where all the provision is. And that meat is to do the will of the Father. So we should be following him anyway, doing the will of the Father. And when we're doing the will of the Father, that's where he is, and we get all our provision. So it's a nice little circle there. It all meets up. Number 3, the third thing, was the water from the rock. They were thirsty. Okay, this surrounds the road to Emmaus. Let's turn to Luke 24:17. Okay. And Jesus, okay, we'll begin with here. We know that this is the day he was resurrected. This is the same day. And 2 of the disciples were walking the road to Emmaus. And Jesus comes up to them. And he says unto them, what manner of communication are these, that ye have one to another, and said one to another, as ye walk, and are sad? They don't recognize him here. It says they knew him not. Okay, and then we have several verses here, and we said, oh, we trusted that this guy, he should have been the one to redeem Israel. And then the women went here, and then some other disciples went here, and they're puzzling. They all have verses, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 verses, them trying to puzzle and figure this out in their natural mind, all this situation, this hard, disconcerting situation. They're puzzling about it. They're trying to make sense of it. And God responds with a knock on the head. Verse 25, and he said unto them, O fools, I don't know if the Lord calling me fool, but whatever. O fools, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not to Christ to have suffered these things, and to enter into his glory. 27 key verse. And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them all the scriptures, the things concerning himself. So he was trying to open their understanding and following it with talking about himself, things concerning himself. Let's jump over really quick to verse 44.